There are multiple reports out of the United States that the Biden administration is planning to buy 500 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine, and those doses would be donated to 92 lower-income countries. Here is what President Biden had to say today as he left for the G7 meeting, which is happening in the United Kingdom.
Mr. President, do you expect to come out with a vaccine strategy for the world?
I have one, and I'll be announcing it.
The leaders of several global organizations say there cannot be an economic recovery without an end to the global COVID crisis. They're calling on wealthier countries to help improve access to vaccines. Now, David Malpass is the president of the World Bank. Mr. Malpass, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to cover a lot of ground here, but begin with what you see as the biggest roadblock to getting vaccination really underway in developing nations.
Thanks. It's a really important question, and it's challenging. The supply is the biggest challenge. So we, the World Bank, have programs in 28 countries now, and very quickly 50 countries, ready to provide capacity to actually administer vaccines. But still, the delivery schedules are the biggest challenge.
So this is really about getting vaccines. I know one of the big challenges with that was the Serum Institute out of India produces so much of the vaccine supplies for the entire world, but India has held back supplies because of its own urgent needs in that country. Do you see that as a key factor in the delay around getting vaccines out to other developing nations?
Yes, certainly. That's one of the big challenges. That was primarily, as I understand it, AstraZeneca type vaccine, and those are valuable in developing countries. But on the good news side, the production runs in the U.S. have exceeded people's high hopes, and so the volumes of vaccines available are going up, and there should be some way to balance that. Basically, what we're talking about is India was struck harder than people had hoped or had thought early in the year, and that is taking up a huge number of vaccines. But the supply of the world is expanding rapidly. That should be good news.
One of the questions around supply, and this has been an ongoing discussion for a number of months, is around the idea of waivers of intellectual property. It's an effort the United States has supported. Canada and others, including the European Union, have not in the same way. I wonder where the World Bank stands on this idea of vaccine waivers, and whether ultimately it would help in the immediate future getting shots in arms. As we look at COVID, it's going to be around for some years. And so one of the big challenges is to have R&D, research and development expenditures that remain high in terms of combating the variants that come out in COVID. And so it's going to be very important that there be this full engagement by the private sector in developing vaccines out into the future. That's not just for COVID. That extends to other areas as well. So World Bank supports licensing of the technology to developing countries, and we have a sizable operation. So the part of the World Bank called the International Finance Corporation has funding and makes debt and equity investments in companies in developing world to make vaccines. And we'll be making announcements on that over the next 2 weeks, sizable announcements of capacity enhancements in the developing world. We are, Mr. Malpass, heading into the G7 meeting. What would you like to hear from, for instance, the leader of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, the US, as they all meet? What needs to happen to help equitably end COVID through vaccines? The leaders have a major role in working together on problems that face the whole world. So I think having the meeting and having discussions of good outcomes for all of them, and also especially for the developing countries, I think that's a big challenge and a good result that can come out of the meeting. As specific, there needs to be both funding, which has been discussed, and very especially the availability of supply and excess supply going to developing countries that have programs. That's the matching that's going to be so important in the efficiency. If you have excess doses this month and next month, release them as quickly as you can so that they can be allocated to countries that have the ability to use those particular vaccines for shots in arms, jabs in arms.
So the natural follow-up for me on that is, how do we define excess? So if I look in the United States, south of the border, they're sort of maxing out the number of at least first shots they can get in. They're nowhere near the rates of vaccination they were 6 weeks ago, down almost to a third of those levels. In Canada, we have a lot of doses on order, and they're pouring in right now, but there continues to be the same sort of demand and pace. So how do you define for developed nations like Canada when to start giving over some doses?
Each country has to define that for itself, meaning, are you trying to vaccinate the most vulnerable population, or are you trying to vaccinate even young people? And when are you comfortable giving up excess? Canada's been shown leadership in thinking about those issues, discussing them at the G7 of what percentage of your population do you want to vaccinate, and when can you begin to give up the extra? One other part of this that complicates it is which vaccine. So there's Johnson & Johnson, and there's AstraZeneca, and so on down the list of vaccines. And different countries in the developing world need different or have requested different types of vaccines and are comfortable administering those to their people. Some of that involves the supply chain, the cold chain, and other aspects, and also the popularity of a given vaccine in a developing country. We're combating hesitancy in many of the developing countries, a reluctance to be vaccinated. And so it's important to have a good communication effort and a good matching of the supply with what the country is willing to administer. The World Bank programs are online, and so you can see for each of the countries, soon to be 50 countries, that what they have said would be their preference, or what they're prepared to bring into the country to provide the vaccinations, and we have financing available for that. So now that the next important step is to have the supply freed up by the manufacturing country so that it can be allocated quickly before it expires.
I want to finish off our conversation, sir, by asking about the economic recovery as we sort of emerge out of COVID. It is going to be unbalanced, very clearly, already is. Developing nations predicting very strong growth, developed nations predicting very, very strong growth. But less wealthy nations are seeing low growth, or in fact, the opposite of that. What do you think the legacy of this pandemic will be in terms of that widening gap?
This is a big problem. I think it will be inequality, that the advanced economies were able to recover, but many of the developing countries are being further left behind. That has to do with the recovery steps that were taken in the advanced economies, meaning big fiscal spending and central bank stimulus that didn't really buoy or lift up the developing world. Also, the inflation is hitting developing countries economies hard because they're dependent on food sources, on global commodity prices. That's posing a challenge. I hope that one other legacy, though, of the crisis is countries around the world working together in inventing vaccines, in manufacturing huge quantities of vaccines, in moving as quickly as possible to the vaccination effort, and also to take care of the vulnerable within their economies. I hope that can be part of the legacy.
Mr. Malpass, a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.